Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy Blake, and I am in Houston, Texas with Family to Family Network. I am a program coordinator, joined by two of my amazing colleagues today, Wednesday, Leslie Lawson,
Hi,
who
everybody.
is the colleague extraordinaire. And that's my new name for you, Leslie.
Thanks,
And
Judy.
Christina Zavala,
Hello.
also colleague extraordinaire.
Thanks.
Today, we are going to discuss what to do if you disagree and the importance of using your procedural safeguards. Next slide, please. So welcome back to some of you, and others might be new. We want you to know that this is a very, very safe place. There's a lot of information. We do not expect you to remember everything, so please do not worry about that. If you feel uncomfortable asking a question, please make sure that you can ask it. We're going to hold questions until the end, or you can put them in the chat box. But if for some reason you feel uncomfortable, just send a private message to Leslie, Christina, or myself, and we will ask the question anonymously on your behalf. Please make sure that you continue to keep yourself muted. Please do not worry. We are not going to go till 7 o'clock. That is for the 6 p.m. presentation tonight. So we should be done in about an hour. Sometimes we go a little bit over. And if you would like the slides, once you complete the survey, please do so, or please let me know, and I'm happy to send them to you. Next slide, please. So this would not be possible without our wonderful sponsor, Aetna Better Health of Texas. Family to Family has been around for over 30 years. We survive on grants and donations. So we are most grateful to Aetna to give you this wonderful presentation. Next slide, please. So one thing that we always want you to remember in any of our training programs is that you know your child better than anyone else. You have many rights as a parent regarding special education. It's important that you learn those rights so that your child receives that, what we call FAPE, free and appropriate education. FAPE requires schools to provide special education so the unique needs of your child are ensured during this process. And, you know, you can, of course, by all means, consult with teachers, consult with therapists, consult with doctors, but you are the one with your child 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Next slide, please. So some of this might be new to some of you, and it's possible that if you don't know the basics of special education, this might be a little bit advanced. We can always send you recordings as to some of our previous presentations. So if you would like that, please email us and we're happy to do so. Keep in mind that all schools must follow what we call IDEA, and that includes charter schools. So this presentation is exclusive to public schools and charter schools. Private schools, totally different story because you're paying for that education. But when it comes to public and charter, they must follow IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Keep in mind, this is federal law, and it ensures that public schools and those charter schools, we want to make sure the educational needs of students with disabilities are met. So there is an IDEA manual. We always tell parents, read it, learn it, use it, take it with you. Parents are an equal member of the ARD committee. And we think that when you walk in with that manual, they know that you've done your research, you've done your homework. And I think it sheds a different light on your role as a member of the ARD committee. So you can download this important document through Disability Rights Texas in both English and Spanish. I believe there was a Vietnamese copy, and now I couldn't seem to find it, but you might want to Google it if for some reason you need this manual in Vietnamese or in another language. But it's important that you have it and that you're aware of it. Next slide, please. So the IEP, this is a term that we use often. You know, public education, we love our abbreviations, you know, FBA, BIP, IEP, ARD, and we know it can be confusing. As you continue to help your child receive that free and appropriate public education, I think these terms will become a little easier for you. The IEP is what we call that individualized education program. That's the centerpiece of that federal legislation that we call the IDEA. And it is to ensure that all children with disabilities receive that free, appropriate public education, and that this education is emphasizing special education and related services to meet the unique needs of your child, preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living. We realize that some of you on this call might have kids in high school, and you're thinking, I don't know if, you know, college is going to be a good fit. Maybe they're going to graduate high school and maybe do employment. And that's great. That's fine. Just know what IDEA is supposed to do. And just know that even if your child may not live independently in the future, we always want to have those high expectations for our kids. So the IEP, it's basically a contract. It's your role as a parent to participate in the development of your child's IEP and understand what you're agreeing to. Again, it's a contract. So just like if you took out a loan, you would always want to know, you know, what's your interest rate? What are your terms? Is there a balloon payment? You want to know the details. It's no different with the IEP. So you want to make sure that you understand what you're agreeing to. Next slide, please. So get ready. What should you do before your ARD meeting? Make sure that you get draft copies of evaluations. You want to make sure that you're aware of your loved one's present levels of academic achievement and their functional performance. Again, another great acronym, another abbreviation called PLAFP. Try to say that a bunch of times. But you want to know, what are the proposed IEP goals and objectives? Is there a behavior plan? You want to make sure that if your loved one has autism, are they reviewing the autism supplement? And are there any other pieces of information that you need before your meeting? So you want to read through these documents ahead of time so that you know what people are going to talk about. We always suggest, you know, you need to do what works best for you. I always asked for these draft copies and evaluations probably about, you know, 3 or 4 school days prior to the meeting. You know, if your meeting is on a Monday morning, you don't want somebody sending it to you on a Sunday night. If it's on a Thursday afternoon, you don't want to receive it on a Wednesday night, because you want to make sure that you have enough time to review it. This is a really important step in the process, because if you don't know where your child's at, it can be difficult to discuss your thoughts and the information the school has given during the ARD meeting. So make sure that you have all that information. We think that it generally makes coming to an agreement easier because you're more prepared. Next slide, please. And Leslie, I forgot which slide you were picking up at, so just let me know.
Okay, you can do this one and then I'll take over for you.
Sounds great. So it's meeting time. If possible, try not to go alone to a meeting. We know, Leslie's been there, I've been there. Most of us at Family to Family Network have. And I think it can be really challenging when you have 8 people from the school district and then you as the parent are there. Bring a friend, bring a neighbor. You don't necessarily have to bring an advocate, but try to bring someone with you just to be those second set of ears and eyes. Try to meet with them ahead of time so they know your concerns and they can ensure that your questions are being addressed. Maybe that person could take notes. Maybe they can make sure that the ARD agenda is being followed. And they can just be that moral support during the meeting. You should also take your child to the meeting. Depending on the age of your child, at a minimum, what I always did with my son, he's now going to be 30 in March, but what I always used to do is at least have him come for a few minutes, just so they can put a name with a face with the document. Because if you have the diagnostician there, they probably maybe evaluated your child, weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, and they've evaluated so many kids since then. And I think it really helps to give it more purpose, if you will, when your child is there, even if it's just for a few minutes. And he can introduce or she can introduce themselves to people around the table, tell them what they like or don't like about school, and then they can go back to class. Now, when it comes time for middle school, then your child should be participating. With my son, I made sure that he participated for part of it, and then he still returned to class. And I'm sorry, I meant beginning in high school, not middle school. That's when your children should be attending ARD meetings, and that would be beginning in high school. Leslie?
Okay, next slide, please. So during the meeting, don't be afraid to ask questions if you don't understand something, the acronyms or something they're talking about or how they're going to implement something. Be sure to speak up. There's no question that, you can't ask. I always like to see data to support any decisions they're making or how the data will be collected. Because if there's no data, then they're just guessing about what progress has or hasn't been made. Be sure to ask if you need support understanding something, or also ask if the teachers or the paraprofessionals that have your student need any type of support. A lot of times they're not really allowed to speak up for that. So that's something you can ask. Oh, well, there's this many students in the class and several of them have IEPs and there's only one para. Is that really enough appropriate support for everybody? So you can always bring things like that up. And if you ask a yes or no question, you're probably going to get a yes or no answer. So you want to ask really good questions like, how is that IEP going to be implemented? How are you going to take data on it? You always want to make sure, this kind of goes back a little bit, that your present levels of academic and functional performance link to the IEPs, because a lot of times what we see, there'll be things in the PLAF that are in the IEP are not in the IEP. Things that the student can do shouldn't be in the IEP. Things that the student is struggling with and needs help with should be. So you want to make sure those two things mesh together. And of course, the PLAF is going to be based on information from you, therapists, doctors, and a really good full and individual evaluation.
Leslie, one of the parents asked, can you cite examples of specific data to ask about?
Okay, so let me give an example with a typical student. So if you have a typical student and the teacher never wrote down their homework grades or their test grades, and at the end of the 6 or 9 weeks, they had to fill out the report card, how would they know where the student was at? They'd just be guessing, right? So if a teacher is not collecting data on the student's IEPs, then how do we know if the student is making progress or regressing? So ask to see the data, ask how the data is going to be collected. There should be some type of data sheets. I think back to when my son Cameron was young, and I asked to see data on his IEP progress, because it was all just, oh yeah, he's doing well, he's doing great, he's doing well. Okay, well, let me see the data you collected. Well, there was no data. And they said, oh, we'll get that to you. Well, 2 weeks later, they gave me data that supposedly was collected on my son's IEPs, but it was interesting because they had collected data on days that he wasn't at school. So I knew that it was pretty much fabricated. So, just ask those questions up front. I don't think anybody's trying to do anything malicious or anything like that, but especially with the shortage of certified special education teachers that we have right now. There are a lot of special education classrooms that don't have certified special education teachers. So you really need to ask questions now. I hope that answers your question. If you ask open-ended questions, you're going to get a better answer. What will it take to make sure my student is supported in the regular education classroom? How are we going to make sure he's appropriately supported in every environment where he needs support? So those kind of questions are going to allow for better answers and for the whole ARD committee to think and brainstorm solutions for your questions. Next slide, please. Okay, I cannot stress this enough. Document, document, document. Anytime you ask for something or you have a question, make sure and put it in writing. Put your request in writing. Email's fine. If you ask a question and then they call you up and tell you something over the phone, follow that up with an email. Create a paper trail. As per our conversation today, I understood you to say this was going to happen. Miss so-and-so was going to be in charge of it, whatever it is. And, be very nice. I just want to make sure we're on the same page, because when I've told parents to do this before, a lot of times they get an email back that says, oh, I'm sorry, Miss Lawson, you misunderstood what we said. So you want to make sure everybody's on the same page, because sometimes we hear one thing when somebody's saying something else. So, and in the meeting, what I like to do, just to remind you, if you have a friend to remind you, or your husband or your spouse or whoever that's with you to remind you, put it on a little note card. Would you please document that in the minutes? So if something's not documented in the minutes, it's probably not going to happen. And then 2 weeks later, when things are going south and things aren't happening like you feel they should be. If it's not documented somewhere, they're not going to remember it. They have a lot of students. So I think documenting is what's going to keep you out of mediation, due process, and from having to file a complaint. Because a lot of times they're not going to document something that really isn't true. And a lot of times you're told something in an ARD meeting that maybe isn't correct. And I don't think it could be just because they don't know. I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose. So a lot of times a parent will call and say, oh, they said this. And I'm like, well, that's not true. That's not what the IDEA says. So send them an email and ask the question and say, you said such and such. This is how I understood you to say it. And am I correct? Because if you document, then you can use that. If you do have to file a complaint or if you disagree, you're going to have it in writing. Otherwise, it's going to be, oh, that's not what I said, or, oh, you misunderstood what I said. So document. I can't stress that enough. A lot of times parents will say, oh, well, I asked for this. And I'm like, is it anywhere in writing? So it'll just help you, I promise. And we can all do that in a very nice way. And we talked about the IDEA manual, and also every year you're either given or the procedural safeguards, or you're told how to find the procedural safeguards. These are two very important tools that you can use. I like to highlight it, tab pages, bring it with you, know your rights when you go in there. I mean, I'm not saying you have to study it and know every little thing, but if something comes up, you kind of want to know where to find something like your procedural safeguards. You want to know what it says about what happens when you disagree. You want to know your rights are, and you want to have that with you, because if they say, oh, well, this is the way we do it in the district, you say, well, that's not really what it says here in my procedural safeguards. They have to tell you, they have to give you prior written notice for anything that they propose or refuse to do. And so you want to know all these rights. Next slide, please. A little more about prior written notice. Sometimes it's written into an IEP, but if you've requested something in writing, they can't just call you up and say, no, we're not going to do that, or no, we don't do that in this school or this district. If they're going to change anything, or if they refuse to do something, they have to give you information in writing at least 5 school days in advance before they change anything or don't do something that you thought you had requested. So you have the right to this information in writing when the school proposes to or refuses to initiate or to change something. One example is identifying your student for the need of special education. A lot of times, if you've just referred your student to be tested, they might not want to do an evaluation. They have to tell you, put it in writing, we're not going to do the evaluation, and here's why, and here's your rights, since we've made this decision. If you disagree with the evaluation, or reevaluation, or if they try to dismiss your student from special education, they can't do that without providing you this information in writing and telling you what your rights are moving forward. You don't just have to accept everything they tell you. You have rights if you don't agree. And that would also include the placement of your child, where they're going to receive their special education services, because remember, special education is a service, it's not a place. and special education can be provided in a variety of settings with different levels of support. Somebody asked if it comes from a specific person. It should somebody on the IEP team. You know, it's different in every district. It could be an official document or a letter or an email, or it could be something written into the IEP, but it should be somewhere written. Okay, next slide. There are some cases where a parent may choose, choose to revoke their consent for special education services. I have not seen that happen a lot, but it could happen. So that's another time that they have to provide prior written notice. So like if you said, okay, I don't want my student to receive any special education services anymore, they have to provide notice 5 days ahead before they stop those services. It has to describe the action the school proposes or refuses to take. Okay, hang on, something popped up here. Judy, it popped up that somebody's enabling
Yes,
translation.
I did that.
Okay,
Yeah,
do I
clicked
click
okay.
save or cancel?
I would save it. That's
Okay.
sort of above my pay grade, but yeah,
Okay, I got it
think
to go
so.
off. Okay. They have to explain why they're proposing or refusing the action. They have to describe how they came to that decision, like what tools they used, evaluations, assessments, records, reports from the school to make that decision. They also have to include a statement that you have protections, and that would then again direct you to your procedural safeguards in case you don't agree with their decision. And they have to tell you how to get a copy of the procedural safeguards if you don't already have a copy. A lot of the schools hand those out at least once a year, but now that everything's online, sometimes they ask you if you can access it yourself online. They also have to provide you with contact information for organizations or individuals that can help you understand the IDEA process. Describe other choices that they considered. But remember, always remember that you're one of the most important members of the ARD committee, and none of these decisions should be made without your input. Okay, somebody asked about placement change without prior written notice. That can't happen. They can't change a student's placement they can't really even change that without an IEP meeting. So now sometimes parents perceive a change in placement and they'll say, we didn't really change their placement. So there's a little gray area. But yeah, you can't change. There are a few things you can do outside of an IEP meeting. Okay. Changing a student's special education placement is not one of them. So if they've done that, you definitely want to use your procedural safeguards. That could be, which is complaint, mediation, or due process. And we're going to get a little bit into those specific things in the upcoming slides. Next slide. And again, the prior written notice should be in your native language and easy to understand. So that's a given. Next slide.
And that's, if I could just add something, Leslie,
Okay.
that is really, really important. I've had parents occasionally send me their ARD documents, and like the first 2 pages are in Spanish and the rest of it's in English. And I realized that, sometimes you might have another child or a cousin or someone who can translate for you, but it's your signature that's on that document. That entire document should be in the language that you are most comfortable with. And
Thank you,
please,
Judy.
please don't be afraid to ask. If you need a translator at your meeting, ask for one. Give them as much notice as possible, because sometimes it can be really challenging to
Yeah.
locate a translator, but it's really important that you have that if that's what you need.
Yes, thank you, Judy. That's very important. And I would even say if you have a translator, sometimes the translators may not know all the terms and
Exactly.
translate things the way they need to be translated. So if you could bring somebody with you that's bilingual, to make sure that the translator is translating things correctly, I would even try to do that. Here's the link to find your procedural safeguards if you need it, and you can go to that page and download it. It comes in over 30 different languages. So it's a great tool to have. Next slide. Make sure you know how the ARD meeting should go, in what order. We're not going to be deciding placement at the beginning of an ARD meeting. There is an agenda. I mean, sometimes you get a little off agenda and that's okay, but you want to keep things in order. And you can go to this link. It's our Texas Project First website. It's a website that we helped do for the Texas Education Agency back when, and they don't upkeep it anymore. We do now, but it's a very parent-friendly website, easy to understand, and you can go and get an ARD agenda and take it with you, and maybe the person with you can make sure you pretty much follow the ARD agenda. And then we've talked about the IDEA manual from Disability Rights Texas, your procedural safeguards. There's also a dispute resolution handbook if you are in a disagreement. There's the parent companion, and all of these things you can get from Texas Project First website or SpedTex, which is a great resource too. You can call SpedTex, you can chat with them online, you can email them if you have a specific question, and they can be very helpful. Next slide. Okay, down to the nitty-gritty. If it's okay if you disagree. Now, I'm not telling you to disagree about every little thing, but if it's something really important, it's okay to disagree. You can do it in a nice way, but just know that if you disagree and do nothing, that's the same thing as agreeing with them. If you disagree, you have to take steps. At your ARD, if you disagree, they have to, I think this is on the next slide, but they have to offer a reconvene ARD. But let's talk about some things you might disagree with. If you don't agree that the evaluation that they did is a good picture of your child and where they're at, you can request an independent education evaluation at the school's expense. In that IDEA parent manual, they have sample letters that you can use to do this. They have several sample letters in there for many different things. That's why I love that handbook. If you don't agree with the program or services, maybe they've denied speech therapy or they don't want to provide appropriate support in the regular education classroom, or maybe you don't agree with, they want to put your child in regular ed without supports, or they want to put your child in a self-contained classroom and you don't think that's appropriate. So make sure your disagreement is documented somewhere in the IEP. And you can even write your disagreement out and have the diagnostician add it, or you can ask the diagnostician to document your disagreement in the minutes of the meeting. Another reason you might disagree is if you go to an ARD meeting and you're not prepared and you just don't even understand what's happening. They're trying to rush you through it. Maybe they've only allotted an hour and you don't want to agree to something you don't understand. If a lot of times I hear, oh, they only allotted an hour for our IEP meeting. Well, that's fine, but if you're not finished, they should table the ARD meeting and then you come back and finish it. If they're not willing to do that, if they try to rush you through and make you agree to something without really going through everything thoroughly, and they refuse to table the ARD meeting, disagree, because that's going to cause a reconvene ARD. But it's important to make sure your disagreement is noted somewhere in writing. If there's no statement of disagreement, the committee might think you're agreeing with them. Next slide, please.
Leslie,
Yes.
there was, just because I know we're doing pretty well on time.
Okay.
Well, you know what? You're almost at the end. Then we'll go through the questions.
Yeah, because I
Let's do
want to.
that. Yeah, you're right.
Have time to take a lot of questions.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. So what happens if you disagree? There will be a reconvene meeting. Another meeting will be scheduled. It should be scheduled. Everybody should get out their calendar, their phones, and reschedule a meeting. The default is 10 days, but let's say you disagreed about the evaluation and you are requesting at that time that an independent education evaluation be granted at the school's expense. They might want to extend the reconvene ARD until after that's done. Or let's say in 10 days, they don't have time or you have a meeting, you're going to be out of town or whatever. It doesn't have to be exactly 10 days, but they do have to schedule another meeting at some point. During that recess, you and the school should work together to gather more information, especially if you didn't understand something. That's going to help you come back to the table and reach agreement. Maybe you're going to seek out help from an organization like Family to Family or Disability Rights Texas. Maybe if you feel the need to, you're going to try to get an advocate to go with you to that reconvene meeting. So you're not just going to sit around during that recess. You're going to gather more information and to help them to see why you are disagreeing and what your student really needs, and to back you up, information to back up why you're asking for this or that and why you're in a disagreement. You can ask for a facilitated IEP meeting. Most school districts have facilitators, or you can ask for a state facilitated IEP. But if you want a state facilitated IEP, you have to request that within 5 days of the first disagreement ARD meeting or IEP meeting. Now a facilitator is not going to come in and make decisions. They're just going to make sure, things are going right and somebody's not saying something they shouldn't, or they're just going to kind of keep things in order. Because sometimes when there's a disagreement, it can get very contentious, unfortunately. Now, if you go to your reconvene meeting, sometimes called the 10-day disagree meeting, you come back to the table and you still can't come to an agreement, you need to sign your name and check disagree again if you're going to do something. Now, if you sign disagree again at the 10-day recess meeting and do nothing, the school will implement the IEP that they feel is best. So you have to take steps. A lot of times parents will say, well, I disagreed. And I'm like, okay, well, what'd you do next? you have to do something next, and that would be mediation, filing a complaint, or filing for due process. If you do nothing, the school gets to do what they want. Now, don't be afraid to file one of these three things if it's needed, if you think it's necessary, because what happens when you file one of these three things, the Texas Education Agency tells the school district, hey, go have another resolution meeting with the parents and see if you can come to some type of agreement. At that point, they really know you know your rights, and they know you're not backing down. And so a lot of times that's where things get resolved, and you never even have to go through with, yes, you had to file it, but you never have to go through with the mediation or the complaint or the due process. Because if you come to an agreement within the resolution meeting, then you're going to draft a new document, whatever you agreed on. Again, it has to all be documented and in writing. And then you can cancel the mediation, due process, or complaint. And some things are better. And there's also an Office of Civil Rights complaint too. Like if you're, it's an ADA complaint, and sometimes if they're discriminating against a person with a disability, it may be an OCR complaint too. So a complaint is where you would use a complaint if it's very cut and dry. For example, there was a parent that they did the evaluation, determined the child needed special education services, including speech and language, speech services, speech therapy services. Sorry. I'm getting tongue-tied. Anyway, so they determined the student needed speech therapy, but they didn't have a speech therapist on their campus. So they told the parent, well, we're just not going to give your student speech, and then this summer we're going to do a big group speech therapy session over the summer. Well, that's really not appropriate. And it's all about what's appropriate for your student. And it's not about what the school wants. It's not about what the parents wants. It's about what's appropriate for each individual student. So the parent filed a complaint. Their child it was very cut and dry. My child, they agreed that my child needed speech therapy. They don't have a speech therapist. They wanted him to come in the summer. That's not appropriate. He's going to regress. He needs those services now. And anytime you file a complaint, you have to put what the remedy should be. I feel like the school district should pay for private speech therapy. And the parent won the complaint. And not only did they make the school pay for private speech therapy, they made the school district pay for transportation mileage to and from, back and forth from private speech therapy. So for a complaint, it has to be something pretty cut and dry where you can prove that they've violated IDEA. Mediation is a very parent-friendly thing. That's where the Texas Education Agency brings in an impartial person, and they put you in one room, the school district people in another room, and they go back and forth and try to help you come to an agreement. So that can work. A lot of times, like I said, a lot of times the school's banking that you either do not know about this or you're not willing to do that. A lot of parents say, oh, I don't want to disagree, or I don't want to file anything because they won't like me. Well, I don't know. We can be nice. They will still like you because you're being a good advocate for your child. They might not be really nice, but do you want friends, or do you want your student to get a free and appropriate education? So due process, one reason, there's a lot of reasons you could file due process if they're denying your student a free and appropriate education. if it's a placement issue, one thing you can do is if you file for due process, and this might be on the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. It might be on there. Getting ahead of myself. Yeah, stay put. So this is something you can, you can only use stay put if you file for due process. Now, again, that doesn't mean you're actually going to have to go through due process because there's a lot of steps to get there. But if they're trying to place your student in a more restrictive environment, or if, let's say, they're trying to place them in a general ed without supports, you can file due process. You have 5 days to do that and invoke what's called stay put. And that way your student gets to stay in the setting that they're in until it's resolved. So that's something to think about. But stay put only applies to due process, not to mediation or complaints. And there is an exception if your student is putting themselves at risk or others at risk, they do have a right to move your child to a more restricted setting. So be sure and review this in your procedural safeguards. It's all in there. Read it, learn it, highlight it, understand it if you have this situation. Next slide. Okay, questions, Judy?
Sure. And before we do that, because I think the questions we might go over on time, if you could go to the next slide so people can see the survey link. Please, please take the survey. Do it right now so you don't forget. In order for us to continue to get grants, Leslie beautifully talked about show me the data. Well, our grant funders, they want to see our data. Did you learn something? Was this helpful? So please, please complete the survey because we need that grant money in order to continue the work that we do. So before we do the questions, Kristen, I sent a message. Could you please private message me your last name? I think it might be different than the one on the screen. It says Beatty, but I might have in my database a different last name for you. So if you could please either private message me or put in the chat, that would be great. Okay. Let me go back here.
Somebody wanted the link in the chat because they're on a computer. Can Kristen?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me try to do that.
And somebody wanted to know if the survey could be emailed because they're on their cell phone.
Yes. Yeah, let me, who is it that's on their cell phone, and I'll email it to them.
Susan Caldwell.
Okay, email. I can do that.
And Delia. Or
Delia?
Delia or Della,
yep.
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. Yes, I will go ahead and do that. And we so appreciate you completing it. So there's lots of questions here. I'm not quite sure. Let me see here. If I can get my, oh, Jasmine, you raised your hand. Hold on one second, Jasmine. Did we answer what happens if a placement change was made by the school without prior written notice?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
They can't change placement without having an ARD meeting.
Right.
Okay. And I asked that question because I'm actually literally in that situation. So I just wanted to know what work should I be doing in the meantime?
Well, I would file a complaint or file for due process because they can't change placement without having a meeting unless they say it wasn't really a change in placement. So there is some gray area there.
Well, my son was
so
in
if y'all have
behavior.
Yeah, we probably need to take that and email Leslie because we've got like 10 questions.
Yeah, if you
And
have very student-specific questions, yeah, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll try to help you the best I can.
Well, my biggest question was about the 5-day waiver. I was told at the end to not waive your rights to kind of review everything, but nobody ever told me what that's like, and I cannot find anything about that process.
Okay, yeah, so, and that's something I really didn't go over, and that's a really important part. I am not leaving that meeting room until I've looked at every page of the document, because I don't know if you guys have ever looked at your IEP, but after certain sections, if they still use the same software they used when my son was in school, it would say they would already have the box checked and it would say parent agrees to everything to this point. And so it's up to you to make sure everything's right on that document before you sign it, and make sure that the minutes of the meeting reflect actually what was said. So if they're not willing to let you sit there and do that, then you can take it home, and you don't want to waive your rights. You know, a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, if you waive your rights, we can start this new IEP tomorrow." That's fine if you've read everything and you're in agreement, but you have 5 days. So, yeah, I'm not going to sign my name to anything unless I know what I'm signing.
So you don't sign during the 5 days.
No, you can sign. I mean, I've signed at a meeting, but I sat there and I looked at the IEP and read the minutes, had them make changes to say, oh, this says he's getting group speech. That's not what we discussed. He's getting one-on-one speech for the first 20 minutes and group for the section. I want everything spelled out. And, oh, this says, you left this very important statement that the principal set out about who's going to be in charge of taking my student from class to class out of the minutes of the meeting. So can you please add that? So that's all up to you to make sure everything's documented correctly.
Right, but I'm saying it if you don't have the time and you do invoke to not waive your 5 days, what is that? What does that look like? So you're
It
saying,
means the ARD meeting has not been agreed upon until you sign that you've agreed or disagreed.
okay, and so that means you don't sign anything, because I did that and they still gave me a document to sign and I was told that I wasn't supposed to.
Well, you could sign a document saying that you were in attendance, but then I'd want it documented somewhere in the minutes that the parent only signed that they were in attendance of the
Okay.
meeting, and they are going to take their 5 days to take the document home and review it before they agree or disagree. So you just want
Okay.
to document.
Okay, that's the part I didn't understand, because I had never done it before and I can't find any language about it.
Okay, and if you send me an email, I try to find that language for you.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you. Can someone put your email in the chat?
Yeah.
Jasmine, you had a question as well?
Yes, thank you so much. So my question is regarding the classifications on my son's IEP. I was informed that he did receive a more recent autism diagnosis this past January, but other health impairment and IDD has been his primary classifications on his IEP. I was told that he cannot have the autism and other health impairment classification on his IEP. Is that true?
Judy, were you going to answer that? I'm sorry, I'm trying to
I'm
get.
sorry. I was trying to get something else. I apologize. I didn't hear it. I apologize.
I was trying
Oh,
to
no
put my
worries.
name in the chat. Okay. I'm sorry to make you repeat that. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. No, it's fine. So I was informed by school personnel, personnel that my son cannot have an autism spectrum disorder classification on his IEP in conjunction with other health impairment and intellectual disability as well. Is that true?
No,
Well,
that's not true.
yeah, that's, yeah, go ahead.
Anytime they tell you something that doesn't sound right, I would say, can you please provide me with that state or federal law that says that? Because I will say a student only needs one
Right.
designation to be served, but if your student does have autism, you definitely want to have the autism label on there, because in Texas, we have the autism supplement with 11 extra protections for students on the autism spectrum. So what I would do is I would email the person who told you that and say, according to our conversation on such and such day, you told me blah, 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 blah. Can you, I just want to make sure I understood you correctly. Can you please reply to this email? And if they call you up, you're still going to follow up with an email, because, and then you can also copy somebody above their head that should know. So your district special education director or assistant director is going to hopefully know all the IDEA laws. So you might want to copy one of them, because that's not true. My son had autism and speech impaired. He had two labels. I mean,
And yeah, mine had autism, and he also has an intellectual disability. So you want to make sure that they're going to have a primary, but if one of those primaries is autism, make sure that is listed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you. Tawanta, I saw you had your hand raised. You're getting pushback. What I did, Tawanta, and to the rest of the group is, there's a wonderful organization, an agency called spedtex.org, and I put their link in the chat box. I always email them so that I can see what they tell me, and then I can print it off or copy and paste it and send it to the parent. What y'all can do is print it off and bring it to your ARD meeting and say, you know, this doesn't sound right, what the teacher's telling me or what the therapist is telling me. And I reached out to SpedTex, and this is what I was told. We also want to get to the other questions. I know they're important. I'm going to just start from the bottom because
Go ahead. Let me start. I think I found the next one in line, Judy.
Okay.
So it says, if placement is proposed from general ed resource to ABC, and I perceive it's not the least restrictive environment for my child, how do I fight that they place her something better like that, like sales? Okay. And some of these programs and acronyms that you're using are going to be district specific. So,
Right.
You know, they can propose whatever they want to propose, but what does the data show? Why are they proposing a more restrictive environment? Have they, so least restrictive environment is a really important thing. The law is very clear that a student must be educated in the least restrictive environment with all the supports and services necessary for them to make appropriate progress on their IEP. So if you have a child that, I'm just going to use an example, that's in general ed and they have an IEP, but they don't have appropriate supports. Maybe they're having behavior difficulties. Has a functional behavioral assessment been done and a behavior intervention plan done? My son, when he was in regular ed, he needed para support to make appropriate progress in regular ed. He needed that para there to modify his work so he could be doing the same type of thing while he was sitting next to his typical peers. She might have to modify his work. You know, what do they need to do? They need to make sure they do everything possible to support them in the least restrictive environment before they place them in a more segregated or self-contained classroom. So if they haven't done that, you definitely want to have an ARD meeting and discuss those options. And, you know, let's set them up for success. If you place a student in a setting and don't provide them the appropriate services and supports, you're setting them up for failure, only to have to move them in a more restrictive environment. So you definitely want to have a meeting. And like I said, they can't change a student's placement without having a meeting, in an ARD meeting. And at that ARD meeting, if you disagree with the new placement, you should disagree and use your procedural say, well, you could have a 10-day recess meeting and try to, come to an agreement outside and then come back. But if the 10-day recess if you still don't agree, then you want to use your procedural safeguards. And mediation could be very helpful in that situation.
Sheriff, unfortunately, because we are such a tiny staff, we're not able to join you at IEP meetings. If you want to email me, I'd be happy to send you a list of suggested advocates that our families have used and had success with. So I'd be happy to send that to you. What if a parent still does not agree with the results of the independent evaluation? What are the parents' options? So both disagree with the school's evaluation and the independent evaluation.
Okay,
Imelda?
so if the school and the independent evaluation are similar, I don't know that you're gonna have a leg to stand on. So that's two different professional teams if two different professional teams are telling you the same thing.
The results of the independent evaluation, what are the parents' options then? So both disagree. Yeah, if the parent agrees with the independent evaluator and the school doesn't agree,
okay, if the parent agrees with the independent evaluation and the school has to consider the independent evaluation, they don't have to accept it. But if it came from, somebody that had appropriate qualifications to do that, and the school says, oh, we're not going to accept that, we don't agree with that independent evaluation, then you have a right to disagree and use your procedural safeguards. Because then if you were in mediation or you were in due process, you could present that other side. And then that would definitely be considered by somebody that's impartial. So, yeah. It pretty much, a lot of parents call and ask about several different things. And a lot of times the answer is going to be, if it's that important, you need to disagree and use your procedural safeguards. Because I have seen time and time again, when you disagree about every little thing, it has to be something big like this, because an evaluation is going to make a difference. Because from that evaluation, you develop the present levels of academic and functional performance. And from the PLAF, you develop your goals and decide on services and everything and placement. So if it's important, whatever it is, whether it's placement or services like, oh, they denied speech therapy or they denied OT, if it's something that you feel is very important to your students' education and you disagree, you have to disagree and use your procedural safeguards. And 9 times out of 10, I would say it's going to get worked out in that resolution meeting. They're banking on you not just throwing your hands up and saying, okay, whatever, I'm going to listen to the school. So I mean, that's going to be my answer a lot of times. Okay, Judy.
Oh, no, you're fine. Christina, if you want to stop sharing your screen. And before we get to Shanna's question, Maria Cortez, could you please private message me your email address? For some reason, I'm not seeing you in there. So I don't know if you're under a different name. So if you could, Maria Cortez, if you could please private message me your email and your phone number, I would appreciate it. Shanna asked, explain how dates of ARD meetings are affected by tables versus a reconvene ARD.
Yeah, so a lot of things in the IDEA law are not black and white. There's a lot of gray area. So if you called Sped Techs up and asked them that question, they like to refer you to the federal or state regulations. I don't think there's going to be anything that specific in there. But what I would recommend is if you tabled the ARD, let's all get our calendars out and come up with a time to come back. I mean, it does have to, a lot of times the law states it has to be reasonable. Okay. So what is reasonable time? So they can't really drag it out. A reconvene ARD is going to happen in 10 days unless the ARD committee, including you, decides, oh, we need to make it longer so we can have time for an independent evaluation, or, oh, we need to make it a little longer because the parent's going to be out of town or has a doctor's appointment or something like that. But the table, there's nothing in that I know of in the law that states when you table a ARD, you have to finish the meeting, but by a certain date, okay, or in a certain number of days. But if it's an annual ARD, they're going to want to finish that meeting so make sure you know your annual ARD date, because they're required to have an ARD at least once a year. So you don't want to have your ARD on the last day, because then if you try to table it, they're going to say, oh no, we're going to be out of compliance with TEA if we don't get this ARD completed today. And they're going to try to rush you through and get it done. So make sure you can schedule your ARD a little ways out. And make sure if you table the ARD, let's talk about before, I'd like to table the ARD because we're running out of time and I still have questions. We haven't gotten through the whole agenda. When can everybody come back? And you're going to have that discussion, and you're going to get that discussion documented in the minutes of the meeting. So if they say, well, we can't guarantee you that we can have this, and if they start all that, can you please put that in the minutes? Miss Diagnostician that's taken the minutes, can you please get that in the minutes? So a lot of things are not going to be specific in the regs. So let's see, what's next, Judy?
It is, and a couple of you have asked for the slides, so no problem. I will send those to you.
I already
Shanna
did.
mentioned nothing in the law about tabling, but the schools will many times not just give enough time for the meeting.
Oh, well, okay. Let me see. If you email me, I'll see where I can find something about tabling the meeting because you didn't finish. But guess what? If you don't finish and they say they're not going to table the ARD, then just disagree. Then you have a 10-day recess.
Yep.
Okay. And they have to come back. And then if you if you go to the next ARD and you're still not, I've heard of people tabling the ARD several times because the school would only schedule short periods of time to complete it. So, but again, we want to do as much upfront collaborating with the school ahead of time.
Right.
So the ARD meeting is just a formality. That's best practices. There's nothing going to be in the law that says they have to do that. But we used to do that. I used to get together with a couple of the people on the ARD committee, and we'd go through the IEP goals and everything. So when we got to the ARD meeting, we still have to go through the whole agenda, but we had pretty much worked everything out ahead of time. So if you can do that, that really helps. Some schools are not willing to do that. So I do understand.
I think we got to all of the questions. If we didn't, can you please unmute yourself? and ask a question? Tawanta, I think we answered yours, or maybe we didn't.
No, that was just a comment I was making. The question that I have is that my grandson did receive an IDD diagnosis. He's in the 8th grade. He's functioning at a 3rd grade level, and the school district acts as if that IDD diagnosis does not exist. And I want him to go into life skills or self-contained, and they are pushing back. And so he is struggling in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and they don't have enough teaching assistants to help him. He's starting to act out, and I don't know what to do. So I keep enrolling him and pulling him out for homeschool. And I just pulled him out of school because the teacher did not let him go to the bathroom, and he defecated on himself in class because he didn't know how to advocate. And I'm just tired of being bullied, and I don't know where to go at this point. I'm like, do I get an advocate or what? Because they say he doesn't qualify to be in self-contained because his IQ is too high. But then when I say, hey, he can be in, look at his functioning, they say, oh no, we don't go by IQ alone. So it's like it's this double standard. His IQ is too high for self-contained. But when I say, they say, oh, he can function in general ed, but no, he's not functioning in general ed.
So I guess what I would say, I mean, there's a lot going on there, but I'm so sorry that happened to him.
Yeah, that really makes me sad, Tawanta.
Yeah, one thing I would do is, the first thing I would do if you ever need an advocate is if you go to Disability Rights Texas and see if they will take your case. They're small, they're overwhelmed, but they will take certain cases. That's always a good option because they don't charge parents. They're not going to take every case. You want to be brief as possible. They don't have time to listen to your whole life history.
Yes.
So just put the facts. Another thing is, there is a broad spectrum of places. So we have an institution over here, or and on the other end we have general ed with no support. So if you have a student that's kind of in between, how can we give that student appropriate supports to make appropriate progress in the general education class? They are not allowed to use lack of funds or lack of staff to deny your student a free and appropriate education. So if your student needs more support in regular ed, because I'd hate to see somebody like that placed in a life skills class, because then he's not even going to be exposed to the same curriculum. And when you have somebody like your grandson, he could do a lot in life with being able to read on a 3rd grade level, but he needs to continue to progress. So there's resource classrooms. Could he go to resource for English and math?
This school district does not have resource classrooms. I'm in HISD, so you know what's going on there. They don't have resource. They have TAs, and so everything looks good on paper, what they're going to do, but what's actually happening is totally different.
Then I would definitely file a complaint, or I would file a complaint, but you have to be very specific. My student is not receiving appropriate support in regular education. And so he needs support, because you know what? If the school can't provide a free and appropriate education, guess what? They have to pay for private school. I mean, I know that's very hard to get, but
and it's an exhausting process, but
yeah, that's through due process. But when they know you know your rights and you start bringing that stuff up, and I hate to say this, it should not be this way, but the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If they know you know your rights, your student is going to get what he needs. And maybe this other student whose parent doesn't know how to advocate isn't going to get what they need. But how can we support your son? If he's acting out, ask for a formal functional behavioral assessment. That's where an LSSP or a BCBA comes in and observes what's going on.
And that's an FBA. That's what they call it. That's the
Yeah.
abbreviation for it.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you definitely want to ask for a formal functional behavioral assessment, because we don't want a teacher who's really not trained to do it. We want a formal one. And another reason we want a formal one is because if you don't agree with it, then you can ask for an independent one at the school's expense. And that way you get to bring an outside professional to observe in the school. That's like about the only way you can make that happen. And so why are the behaviors happening? And a good LSSP or BCBA is going to be able to see, oh, these behaviors are happening because this student is not being appropriately supported in the general ed classroom, and he needs para support.
Right.
So, and then they're going to develop a behavior intervention plan. And a lot of times behavior intervention plans aren't necessarily about the student. Sometimes it's about the people that are supporting him. You know,
Yeah.
for instance, I have a friend whose son is on the autism spectrum, and he would have behaviors or shut down when he was presented with too much work. Well, they came
Yes.
and did an FBA, and the LSSP said, oh, he's getting overwhelmed and shutting down because you're overwhelming him.
Mhm.
Know? And so we're going to provide him a worksheet with only 3 problems at a time. And when he gets those done, and then that solved the problem. So sometimes it's not that the student is acting out, it's that other people are causing the behaviors to happen. That's not always the case. I mean, but it sounds like that. And what are we doing to make sure that your grandson is allowed to go to the bathroom when he needs to? So I'm going to be up there talking to the principal and getting this incident documented and things like that. I mean, we do have a list of advocates we can send you. There are a couple of other cost advocates on the list too that are maybe not free, but maybe on a sliding fee scale. And then we have some that you can pay for, but
So, Tawanta, if you want to email me, I'll be happy to send you the list of advocates.
Okay, Miss Judy, I'm just exhausted.
I'm sure you are, and it's scary. And my son would be so brokenhearted. And we've had other similar situations, and it's hard, especially if there's a substitute teacher.
So there's no resource classes in HISD?
No, so they have the self-contained, they have the life skills, and then they have general ed with support. And
That's
Okay,
interesting.
go back and look at his IEP. If his IEP says that he needs this many minutes of support, that's on the schedule of services page. And if y'all want
Yes,
to,
ma'am. It's all there. But when I actually look into it and start investigating and finding out, I find out there's only one TA for the whole 3 grades, or one SPED teacher for all 3 grades, and she's floating between all 3 grades. They're only spending maybe like 15 minutes in class with the whole class of
right.
it's a mess.
Tawanta, we want to help you, but we have another training that we have to prepare for. And I apologize. It's not that we don't want to help you.
It's
Our
no problem, I
our
understand.
systems are broken.
Yeah.
And our organization is trying so hard to help families. We are stretched so thin.
I
And Judy, let me
appreciate
say
y'all.
one more thing about that, because this
Yep.
is a general thing that will help everybody. You want your IEP to be ironclad.
Yeah.
If it says your student is going to need in-class support on that schedule of services page for a certain number of minutes, that's very vague. So in the minutes, let's talk about what does that in-class support look like? Okay, is it somebody that's going to be in the class Because if they're not in the class when he needs the support, when he doesn't understand something, or when he needs to go to the bathroom, and that support person should definitely know that. Let's get it detailed in the minutes of the meeting. And that's for anything. Like parents will say, yeah, my kid has 30 minutes a week of speech. And then when I say, okay, is it individual? Is it group? Oh, it's group. How many kids are in the group? I
Exactly.
don't know. You better know that. You better get that all figured out in somewhere in the document, okay?
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate
And
y'all.
I'm not fussing at anybody. I'm just get worked up when I hear these kind of things happening. So don't take it personal.
Yeah, definitely, definitely not. We need to wrap it up. We so appreciate all of you joining us. If you would like the slides, please email me. And our next class will be on October 16th. Section 504 versus IEPs. What's the difference? We hope you have learned a lot. Again, thank you for those who have taken the survey. Please email me if you would like the slides. Because
And
that
let
way
us
I
know
can
if you
do
need
is-
any help.
And yeah, I can just do it right then. Thank you for the compliments. We appreciate it. I would not survive without Leslie. Let me tell you. Wealth
back
of
at you, Judy.
information. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Reach out if you need help.